Hi, everyone. I'm MK. I'm IPMG's Communications and Outreach Specialist. And joining me are, why don't you guys introduce yourselves real quick?
Well, I'm Lindsay Gear. I'm a supervisor from Northwest Indiana area.
And I'm Sarah England. I'm a case manager serving Southern Indiana.
All right. So all throughout September, IPMG has been sharing success stories and information on our social media, just spread knowledge about competitive integrated employment. And we wanted to end the month with this video to answer some FAQs. So here we go. Let's start out with what is competitive integrated employment? And that's a long word. So if we refer to it as CIE, that's what we mean, competitive integrated employment. So basically, it's where employees with disabilities are included on the payroll of a competitive business or industry. The individual receives at least minimum wage and benefits consistent with others in the workplace, and where there are natural opportunities for integration and interactions with coworkers without disabilities, and also with customers and the general public. So what are some examples of, and what are not some examples of CIE?
Yeah, so I'll start with what isn't an example of CIE. So it's helpful when we're thinking of this to just think of the words competitive and integrated. Because as you're thinking about a position, if it seems like it meets both of those things, then it probably is CIE. But for an example of something that might not be, so let's just say somebody, they have applied for a job at a hardware store and they've been offered, $9 an hour, and, they're able to do the job just as any other employee would. And they're happy with this, they accept the job, all of that. And then later that business goes on to hire others who are similarly experienced and capable, but they make $15 an hour and have access to PTO benefits. So while that position might be integrated in that it has an environment where individuals can interact with all members of the community, it's not competitive because it's not offering the same wages and it's not offering the same benefits, even though the individual is able to perform at the same capacity as everybody else. And maybe for another example where we might have something where the pay is comparable, but it might not be integrated, is perhaps someone's working at a warehouse and they're employed at a company or in a program where they work with a group of other employees who all also have a disability, and their direct supervisor or manager might be a job coach or a direct support professional or a manager for a program of that type. And they make the same as everybody else, but they're not in an integrative environment. So that would not be CIE either. And then I think the only other situation I can really think of is similar. So let's just use the same example as before. There are some programs where an individual might have their wages assessed based on their productivity. And if it's assessed and offered at below minimum wage, let's say in this case, the individual, or I'm sorry, the employer holds a sub-minimum wage certificate, so it's legal for them to do this. And they offer the individual based on their productivity testing, say $6.50 an hour. That's not competitive, because even though even if they were to integrate their workplace, if they're not making above minimum wage, it can't be CIE. But some examples of things that can be, this is much more fun to talk about. So a really common example of that might just be somebody who goes and applies for a job at a local restaurant, and they get a position clearing and cleaning tables. They make about $10 an hour, and they get the same, type of wage, benefits, and opportunities to advance as everyone else. This is a pretty common example of what CIE can look like. And the important part, I think I forgot to mention this, is that it does have to be above minimum wage. So That is, I think I did already see that actually. um, Let me think here. Another great example of what CIE can look like is somebody might be working at a bookstore as a cashier. They're finding they don't really like this job very well because there's just a lot of interaction with customers going on, and maybe they're not a fan of that. So they talk to their supervisor about it, and they're like, maybe this just isn't the job for me anymore. But in working with their team and their supervisor, they find out that they are really good at working with the inventory systems and maintaining shelves and keeping them looking nice. And even though there's no specific job at that bookstore where that's a role that's advertised online or hired for, they go ahead and carve out that position for that individual anyway. And maybe they've got to adjust their hours a bit because it's just a particular position for them. But as long as they're making above minimum wage and they're still in an environment where they can interact with others while they're on the floor, interact with their coworkers, that's still competitive integrated employment. So it doesn't just have to be whatever an employer puts online or offers as a formal role in their company. And then another great example, and there's so many examples of what this looks like, but is self-employment. So if an individual is selling their services or a product they make to their community, and they're making, a good wage doing that, I mean, that's competitive employment too.
Well, those are awesome examples. Thank you. So why is CIE important? What are the benefits of CIE?
CIE is important because it gives those with developmental disabilities the opportunity to work full or part-time, making the same wages and gaining the same access to the same benefits as those without disabilities. It gives those with developmental and intellectual disabilities the opportunity to expand their circle of support by forming friendships with their coworkers, and helps them learn more about the community that they live in. Data actually shows that 14% of individuals with disabilities work in an integrated job, compared to almost 76% of people without disabilities.
All right. So yeah, CIE is super important. There are so many benefits. There are also some barriers, and some examples of barriers. It could be systematic, the income threshold caps, transportation, lack of training and information for employment specialists, and employment discrimination. Second barrier is the workplace. Employers' lack of knowledge, denial of reasonable accommodations, and inaccessible work environment. And then the third we'll talk about is a social barrier, like doubts about whether individuals with disabilities should or can, family fears and misinformation, and also stereotypes around capabilities. So what is Indiana doing to increase CIE?
Yeah, so in recent years, there's been quite a bit that's been going on. And in response to the benefits that you were talking about, as well as the barriers, in 2017, Indiana became the 35th state in our nation to adopt an employment first policy that was passed in April of 2017. It's called the Employment First Act. And the basis of that law is stating that employment in the community is the first and preferred outcome of all services for people with disabilities. And affirming their right to work in the community and earn a living wage and interact with others regardless of their disability or the severity of their disability. So that was a really, really big moment. And there was a lot of agencies and a lot of communities and families and individuals who did so much work leading up to that. And so as part of that act, the Indiana Commission on Rehabilitation Services developed what is called the Employment First Plan. And this is essentially the plan for how agencies, publicly funded agencies, are going to carry out that mandate of ensuring that everybody has access to CIE. And that's pretty lengthy. I mean, it's about 20 pages. You can find it online if you want to. But the 6 main focus areas that they identified after a couple of years of studying and collecting data and talking with stakeholders is first that we need to find and support employers so that they can hire individuals with disabilities, because, you know, it's a challenge for the individuals seeking jobs, but it can also be a challenge for the employers to figure out how to best accommodate them. Secondly, we want to promote effective school to careers transitions. So that might be offering more programs and resources to high schoolers who are exiting the workforce at the same level of their peers. Thirdly, align policy and funding to promote employment outcomes. That one's pretty self-explanatory as to why we would need to do that. And then fifth, to create high expectations and economic self-sufficiency among individuals with disability. So really, you know, encouraging and expecting and knowing that individuals can have those things from themselves, because they can. And then six is to collect data and review our progress and make sure that all of these things are moving forward in ways that are actually helpful to our communities. And there's this affects several state agencies. This affects several state agencies. Some of them might be a little more obvious: Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, Bureau of Developmental Disabilities. Those are some pretty obvious ones who would be impacted by this legislation. Department of Workforce Development, Department of Education, their Division on Special Education, Division on Mental Health and Addictions, and the Social Security Administration's Get to Work program. So those are all explicitly impacted. And so it's a really broad legislative change, and all of these organizations are going to be working towards supporting CIE. But there's also plenty of other Indiana-based agencies and supports. Like I said, they were doing work to get us towards these legislative outcomes for a very long time. So they have been in this fight for a minute. But there's several. In the ARC of Indiana is probably pretty well known. The Indiana Association of People Supporting Employment work to include the Institute on Disability and Community. So like I said, this isn't, even though Indiana is kind of just now taking some of the first big steps towards getting CIE, supporting it and encouraging it more. There's just a lot of resources available and a lot of people who care about this issue. So I'm really excited to see what the future holds for this.
Yeah, definitely. There are so many, agencies and supports out there in Indiana. And if you guys watching have any questions, feel free to reach out to your case manager and they'll be happy to tell you more about that. So how can you prepare your loved one for CIE?
You can prepare your loved one for competitive community employment by making sure to include them in all meeting plans and keeping them an active part of the conversation. It's important for an individual's team to anticipate concerns and obstacles and then work together to find solutions. Another thing that you can do is ask your case manager to connect your loved one with someone that would have a similar work experience. This way they can make a more informed decision about what they like and they don't like. But most importantly, it's really important to be excited for them. It's going to be an adventure.
So we've already mentioned some resources for CIE, but where can you find help finding and keeping CIE?
One thing that you can do is reach out to your local vocational rehabilitation office. BR's core mission is to help those looking to prepare for, find, and enter employment. BR can support things like trial work experiences, job development and job support, assistive technology, business development, driving evaluations, as well as other services that IDD agencies may not be able to provide. VR can also, or may be able to support college or technical training as part of a career path. Your loved one's case manager can be helpful by explaining information that might be needed as part of the application and intake process. Your loved one's team will work together from the start to review what is working and not working to make sure that your loved one succeeds. Once they've maintained a job for long enough to demonstrate it is stable, VR will discuss closing the case. This would be an appropriate period of time, but not less than 90 days. From there, the team will meet to talk about long-term supports, both formal and informal. Waiver services can provide extended services, and their representative would see your loved one at work and attend meetings to relay how things are going, share successes, and troubleshoot concerns they may have.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you both for joining me. I know this was a lot of information to cover in a short amount of time, but like I said before, if anyone watching has any more questions about CIE, please reach out to your case manager. There are so many resources out there, and IPMG is there to help you. So thank you again. Thank you to everyone watching. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.